Hello and welcome to the Global News Podcast, where we go behind the headlines to find out more about a story and ask why it really matters. I'm Valerie Sanderson. Ukraine is getting $100 billion from the European Union, more than 3 years after Russia's invasion began. So, what will this mean on the ground? Mikey Kay is the co-host of the BBC programme The Security Brief and a former assault helicopter pilot in the British military, and he's just returned from a visit to Ukraine. So, Mikey, welcome to the Global News Podcast. Will this money make a huge difference, do you think?
Yeah, we're talking $100 billion. And I think it's obviously it's significant. It's a combat indicator, if you like, of Europe's willingness to support Ukraine when the United States seems to be stepping away. But the critical component here, Val, is that I used to work in defence procurement in helicopters. And it's a little bit more nuanced than the headline, which is $100 billion. So that $100 billion has to be spread not just across defence, but also economic areas. So the power grid and the infrastructure that's being targeted by Russia at the moment, and also humanitarian. But the good news is that a significant amount of it will go towards defence. But the two key areas and the questions that need to be asked about how that contributes towards defence is it the critical capability and military equipment that the Ukrainians need? And there are all sorts of approvals that go with that. And then the second point is the procurement timelines. Is whatever the Ukrainians are asking for, are we talking about getting that equipment in a month, or are we talking years? Because the fight is on now.
You've been talking to people there when you visited Ukraine. What do they say they need?
Yeah, I met two military commanders that have had a lot of experience in the field. The first one was a Ukrainian assault helicopter commander. And his task really was to develop what are called tactics, training and procedures, TTPs, in order to start targeting the one-way attack drones, they're called Shaheds, developed by the Iranians, the blueprint given to Russia. Russia are now developing their own very similar drone, one-way attack drone called the Garan 2. And you're looking at a threat of about over 6,000 a month that are coming into Ukraine. So the former commander was tasked to develop a counter mechanism to that. And his idea was actually targeting the drones from his own helicopters. And how do you do that? And the interesting part of that was, in order to get early detection on the drones, especially at night, which is when most of these attacks occur, they need a capability called a forward-looking infrared camera. So a thermal camera, which allows them to see out to kilometers and not just meters. And it's that type of equipment that they've been denied in the past and had to go literally on the internet to Alibaba, which is the Chinese Amazon, purchase that capability and develop their own ways of bolting it onto the aircraft and targeting the drones.
Well, interesting you say that, because Ukraine is saying it's used aerial drones to attack a Russian tanker.
Yeah, drone warfare is what it's at. And when you have the head of NATO, when you have the UK's chief of defence staff saying that they need to prepare for war with Putin and Russia, the main threat that needs to be considered in a critical way by NATO and the West and Europe is how to deal with a potential onslaught of 6,000 of these one-way attack drones. And I think that's one of the key areas when it comes back to that $100 billion. It's delivering what Ukraine actually really, really needs and doing it yesterday.
You have obtained exclusive footage. Tell us what we're seeing and what it means.
So the footage was given to me by one of the military commanders, and I'm a former helicopter assault pilot. I've done 3 tours in Iraq, 2 in Afghanistan, Kosovo. But I've never seen anything quite like this. We never targeted drones when I was flying. And so the footage that we can see is firstly by daytime, and it's the door gunner shooting at a Shahed drone. Now, the Shahed drone stands out here because there's snow on the ground. So it pops out from the snow, which makes it easier to identify. But if you imagine that's happening in the summer where you don't have snow on the ground, that becomes relatively camouflage. It makes it harder to track and ultimately take out. If you then go to night, which again is where most of these operations are happening, the attacks are happening, becomes even more difficult. And so they've had to develop techniques using thermal cameras that allow them to identify the threat early, so out to 3 to 5 kilometers, and then also to intercept. And Val, the interception piece is critical here. These drones fly at about 120 miles an hour. The helicopters fly at about 150 miles an hour. That means there's a 30 mile an hour overtake, which isn't a lot. So the intercept of the helicopter to the drone has to be absolutely spot on accurate. There's also footage, which we can see, of one of these drones flying at about 30 to 50 feet over Odessa. That's on its way to its target. And these helicopters are using what's called electro-optical cameras in order to identify this. And what you'll see in this footage is that it flies over the city at ultra low level. And then once it comes out beyond the city into a wooded area, that's when they can shoot it down. And they have to be supremely accurate. They can't spend, minutes trying to shoot this thing because they'll run out of ammunition. And they don't know what the actual target's going to be. So they've got to get it quickly. And that's what this additional critical equipment that they need, that's why it's so important.
How innovative has Ukraine been? I mean, how has it moved warfare on from your own experience?
The innovation, Val, has been off the charts. And what I was kind of frustrated about when I was speaking to these commanders, and I spoke to the head of the Typhoon Brigade, he's
in Ukraine.
In Ukraine, he's basically running sort of special forces drone operations right on the front line. We're talking within 30 kilometers of Russian troops. And I think the most sort of compelling part of all of this is Ukraine has been treated like the poor cousin in terms of supporting it. But the intellectual property and the experience and the information they have of literally thinking about ways of countering these onslaughts of drone attacks, that knowledge is absolutely critical to the kind of threat that the Chief of Defence Staff and the head of NATO are all talking about. And I think there has to be more of an equilibrium on a respect for Ukraine and the way they're dealing with this threat with little resources, doing so much with so little, if you like. Sounds a bit like a Churchill quote. And they need the support in the areas and the respect in the areas where they say they need it. That information then needs to be treated with great respect by NATO and by European countries.
And by the US?
And by the US, and used to build an infrastructure and a military capability that will help defend Europe against any potential aggression from Putin.
So finally, what is the key to Ukraine's military, do you think, over the next few months once this money starts coming through?
Val, the major threat, without any doubt, is what's coming in from the air, and it's the drones. And we're looking, in July alone, there were over 6,500 drones launched all over Ukraine. We're not just talking about Kyiv, we're talking quite deep. And so that's where the major threat's coming from. You've also got ballistic missiles, but you've got more conventional means to take out those. And they need basically more infrastructure and they need more equipment to be able to develop their own what's called tactics, training and procedures in order to protect them from what Russia's throwing at them.
Thanks, Mikey. And that was Mikey Kay, co-host of the programme The Security Brief here on the BBC. And if you want to find out more about this story, just listen to the Global News podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And if you particularly liked this episode, please subscribe to us here on YouTube. And if there are other stories you want us to look into, please tell us in the comments below. But that's it from this episode here on YouTube. Thanks for listening and thanks for watching.